kind of database or running server on the back end, right?
Yeah. Well,
but still kind of dynamically manipulating data somehow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I will preface this by saying, as a person who runs the Jamstack meetup, we've had issues with naming and how to describe it and all sorts of things. And we're actually in talks. Netlify is sort of the one who branded this thing. So Netlify is sort of the company that everyone's like talking to, like, hey, let's name this better. Your understanding is probably fairly typical. That's kind of what people understand of Jamstack. I would rather rephrase it as something like this. We have all this power at edge nodes of CDNs. We have serverless functions that can render things on the fly. We have things as a service, databases as a service, or image manipulation as a service. So Jamstack is more like an umbrella term that can wrap up the ability to run an entire application serverless if you do some work ahead of time, right? So all of the things that aren't dynamic, you can pre-render. Those are just distributed to your edge nodes on a CDN. They're available super fast. Nothing, login is done over an API, right? You say, maybe you're using OAuth or some other third-party authorization service, or maybe you're writing your own authorization service, but it's just over a little API. It's not rendering the page itself. You just connect to authorization and come back. Those things help keep things secure because you have like a smaller API surface area for attackers to come in. So it's more about statically rendering as much as possible and distributing as much as possible to serverless. There is certainly a case we made that you could run your own servers, you could run your own database, you could run all your own backend stuff, and then you're running your own servers. You're not actually serverless, but your front end site kind of is. You're running like static files that then connect to your backend services. There's an argument to be made that's Jamstack. I think the idea is that as much as possible is statically rendered ahead of time, and just the dynamic bits are kind of upgraded.
Thanks, you gave me plenty to research later.
Yeah, and I mean, Jamstack.org is they're undergoing like an overhaul right now to sort of refocus on this, because in the past the name was JAM, all caps, and then stack, and the reason for that was because it was JavaScript APIs and markup, and that led to a lot of questions of like, okay, well, is my site Jamstack if I don't use JavaScript? What if I use like Go and compile it on the back end or something, or Dart? And the answer is yes, that's all Jamstack, because it's just this idea of like doing things as fast as possible with serverless. So it's undergoing some overhauls as we speak, but it should give you all the information you need there.
Thomas, can you tell me what an edge node is?
Yes, absolutely. So an edge node is, I guess the terminology comes specifically from CDNs, although it's kind of been repurposed for other things. So CDN is a content delivery network. Basically, something like what is the Amazon provided option? CloudFront. I think CloudFront is Amazon's CDN. And basically, yeah. So basically, Amazon takes care of putting data centers all over the world. There's one in Chicago, there's probably one in Denver, there's one in LA, one in Seattle, they're all over. And when you say you add something to an S3 bucket, which is Amazon's like just storage, put an image in an S3 bucket. If you have CloudFront hooked up to that, Amazon will say, you have a new thing in your S3 bucket. The first time someone tries to request that, Amazon will route to the closest possible edge node and they'll request that image. And what that does is reduces latency, right? So if you're in Denver and you're hitting a Denver edge node, your latency is going to be super short. If you're in Denver and you're hitting like an Australia node, it's going to be a lot longer. Like it's the amount of time that light takes to go that far, generally speaking, but there's things between that slow it down. The first time you hit that edge node, it won't have it. So it'll go to the root server and it'll get the actual piece of content, whether it's an image or a page or whatever it is, a JavaScript file. And then it'll cache it on that edge node and it'll deliver it to you. The next time you or anyone else hits that edge node, it'll have it immediately. So basically it distributes content and it keeps the latency between your computer and where the content is coming from as low as possible. That's the way that CDN work. The way that that's been repurposed is something like, Cloudflare. You can run workers on their edge nodes. So you can now run code that runs on their edge nodes. And you can do that with AWS Lambdas too. You can do it with all sorts of other things. And they're basically just running some code, JavaScript or some other language on those data centers, so that instead of running it on some centralized server, it's running closer to you. So the data can get back to you faster. That's basically it.
Thank you.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
Are these edge nodes like a thing specifically, like a Jamstack specific thing, or have they been being used for a long time, or?
Jamstack specific? No, absolutely not. Very useful for Jamstack, definitely, because we want to be able to go serverless. We want to be able to run small microservices as a function that's running in the cloud somewhere. But no, they're not Jamstack specific, and they have been running for quite some time. I think AWS Lambdas have been around for. I'm going to throw out a number here that's probably totally wrong. I would say like 5 to 8 years, maybe. Whenever AWS got really big, sort of the first big release after like their storage solution S3 and their CDN CloudFront, the next big thing was AWS Lambdas, which is their ability to run functions in the cloud. Now, it took them a little while to run those as edge nodes because that was initially just like you're running in the US East data center or whatever. But pretty quickly after that, they realized, hey, we could also run these on our CloudFront network, and then you can run Lambdas at the edge, is what they're called. And so it's really useful for anyone. In fact, I'm writing a Lambda right now where I upload an image to it, and it sends it off to like Cloudinary for my image hosting, and it sends it off to Contentful for like content management. So they're really useful for anyone who just wants to like run a function that does a thing, and it just does that one thing. Sorry, did that answer your question? I'm not sure if that really got to it. Was that right?
I think so. Is it
Okay.
is it effectively code that you can send like requests to that chunk of code, and rather than sending it all the way to a server or something like that, you're sending it to the closest thing to you?
Yeah, absolutely. That's how serverless functions at the edge work. Of course, if you're talking about edge nodes for CDN, you wouldn't be able to run the code. But yes, functions at the edge would do that. And yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, if you run a serverless function at the edge, you basically are interacting with whatever that service wants you to interact with. So with Lambda, for example, I hate to get into AWS stuff. It's the worst, but Kyle's like, yes. In order to hit an AWS Lambda from a public endpoint, you have to also be running AWS API gateway. You need to put an API gateway in front of your Lambda, and then you send requests to the API gateway, and it transfers it into like a JSON object, and then it delivers that JSON object to a literal function. Like if you're writing JavaScript, just like JavaScript function, it's the handler is what it's called, and it delivers this payload to your function, and then that function runs. You can do whatever you want with it, make API calls, make calls to. You can't really do disk things because it's obviously on the cloud, but you can like write to Amazon S3, or you can write to other storage solutions. And then once the function's done, it just shuts down and it's all gone, other than you having saved things or sent API requests or whatever. It's not quite as easy as just like, hey, I want to run this function, but you are like essentially using like a API endpoint to then run the function.
I have a question.
Absolutely, go ahead.
Okay, so when you're remote working, you are working with people from like different time zones, and you are working from your like home space. So, what boundaries do you set to kind of separate work from your own life?
Right. The first thing here, this is kind of a shameless plug, although I think it's a really good resource. GitLab has a resource called, I think it's called allremote.info. Let me go to that and make sure it's right, allremote.info. Yes, allremote.info. So GitLab is one of the largest and first companies to be like 100% pure remote. I definitely recommend downloading this thing. It's got information there for managers and for people who are just working remote. And a lot of things I'll say are probably in there. I'll say them from my experience rather than just in a general situation. The biggest thing for me is keeping a space separate for work. see right now I'm standing and I'm basically in the corner of this room. I have a window right here so I can look out if I really need to. I've got a standing desk. This desk is only for work, and I stand here to work. I've got a little pad below my feet so that my feet don't get sore, and I don't come over here for anything else. If I'm standing here, I'm working generally, other than this. When I'm in an office, this is a spare bedroom in my house, so I'm in like an office space. I do have my personal computer in this room, but when I'm standing here, it's work. When I'm over there, it's like personal projects or gaming or something like that. That's one big thing to keep things separate. Another thing is to set like schedules for yourself. So if, like I said earlier, like I don't really do well in the morning, when I get up at like 9 or whatever, and I go to work and it's like 10 o'clock, that's when work starts. And if I want to do something else during the day, it isn't necessarily something that I need to document or write down or tell anyone, but it's a break. It's that mental thing where like, I'm going to take a break now and I'm going to go make lunch, or I'm going to go play a video game for a little while or something like that. I take a break, and because it's a break, I need to end that break, right? I can't just like play video games for the next 4 hours. I have to come back to work and like do stuff. So I take a break, I do whatever, and I come back. So having that space separation, having time delineation, like I'm now on a break or I'm now working, those things are important just as a mental thing. A lot of people find that they need to dress for their job. I tend to wear like my pajama pants and a t-shirt, so I'm not a good example of that. But some people are like, I'm gonna put shoes on because when I go to work, I have shoes on. And so I'm gonna put shoes on, I'm gonna wear socks, I'm gonna have pants, I'm gonna have a real shirt on. And that's important for some people to kind of shift their body into like, this is remote time now. You mentioned something else about time zones, and I want to get to that too. So what, can you restate that question again? Or how much of your question did I answer here?
A lot, actually. So as far as like taking breaks go, do you need to set that expectation with the team that you're working with, or how does that work?
Well, how does that work? That's a loaded question. That's going to be, how it works is going to be dependent on the team that you're working with. I'm super obviously privileged, I guess, to be working at a company where work is second and family and friends are first. That's actually something that our CEO posted today in our Slack. With all this virus stuff, people are feeling drained and anxious and tired and whatever. And so at my work, family and friends are first. So if you need to knock off for a couple of hours and you won't be around, that's okay. Nobody's going to like judge you for that. It may be dependent on your team, right? Your manager or the rest of your team, they may want to know like, hey, are you going to be around for the next few hours? I need to know that. I would say, as a general rule of thumb, if you are not going to be able to get to your phone, like, and just be like, hey, I'm taking a nap. I can't come to the phone right now. If you can't answer responses, just like put something in Slack or like an email responder or something like that and say, I am feeling drained and I need to take a quick break. I'll be back at such and such time. If that's important to your team to have that level of visibility into what you're doing, it's important to communicate with that. And that's actually sort of the underlying most important thing with remote work is you can no longer see your coworkers. And so you have to communicate to the level that they expect. So that means documenting things, writing things down, putting things in emails, or like I just said, giving them insight into exactly whether you're available or not.
And
of course, it's going to depend on your team. And I hope that your manager is understanding enough that you can say, sorry, I was gone for 3 hours today. I had to take a nap because I am feeling super anxious about this virus thing and I needed to sleep. It's great if they understand that. If they don't, you'll just have to be more visible.
Got it. And then like one more follow-up question on that. So you mentioned that your working hours are very flexible when you're remote working. And is that because you're working towards a deadline? I mean, like, how is your progress tracked?
Right. Well, I can speak specifically only to GitLab. So this obviously won't apply outside of GitLab, but I can tell you what we're doing. Our progress is tracked based on essentially number of merge requests that we submit and completion of deliverables. So our product owner decides what's going to be important for a milestone. Milestones are about a month long. our manager understands his team and how much team bandwidth they have. And we all report that to him every month. Like, hey, I'm going to take off 4 days this month. So just don't schedule me for a full 30 days. I need 26 or whatever. Well, I guess minus weekends. So whatever that number is. So then the manager knows the bandwidth, the product owner knows what they want, and then they sort of hash out which deliverables are going to get done that milestone. Manager then assigns that to each individual person, and that's basically it. We're responsible to get those things done and make sure that we are working accurately toward the end goal of merging those things. There's lots of other caveats that go into that. At GitLab, our number one priority as far as work goes is making sure that we're unblocking other people. So if someone assigns me a review of their code, my number one priority is to get that review done so that I'm unblocking them. Other than that, we kind of just make sure you get your work done. That kind of gets to another thing about remote work is you have to be trusted and you have to feel trusted, right? If you don't feel like your manager trusts you, or you don't feel like your company trusts you to be working while you're remote, you're probably going to burn out pretty fast, because you're going to just work 9 to 5 and be doing something all day long and not taking breaks. I don't know what your experience is like in offices, but when I worked in an office, we took breaks pretty regularly. I get up and I go get coffee and I talk to somebody in another cube, or we go outside and these guys that I worked with, we play hacky sack for like 30 minutes. Like, we take breaks, and like, it's okay to take breaks. And I think a lot of people, when they work remote, they think, or maybe their company gives them the impression that they're not trusted, and they just don't take breaks. They work from 9 to 5 and they get burned out after like a week of that. So it's important to like give your mental health and your body the rest that it actually needs.
Thank you.
I'm gonna jump in here. George, you had your hand up.
Yes, I did. So Mike, I had if I could speak, I had a quick question. So with like remotes, and you guys have like different time zones, how do you guys manage with like if you get stuck with a problem? Because like I know that developers get stuck with like issues all the time. How do you manage that? Like, do you just have to wait for somebody to like send you a response, or how does that work?
Yeah, the nicest thing about asynchronous all remote, like GitLab is that we have a large enough company that we can reach outside of our team to resolve problems like that. So I'll give you an example. I'm in the front end part of the engineering department, and in Slack, I'm in like a front end group, and I'm in the create stage of GitLab's product lifecycle. So I'm in a create group, and that group is spread out all over the world. Then under create, I'm in a group called source code. So I'm on the source code part of GitLab's team. And that's a much smaller team. We have people in Vancouver, we have people in Australia, we have people in Portugal. So that's a little bit less people and more spread out. But if I have a problem and my team can't resolve that for me, my next step is to like escalate it up and just get it in front of more people. So my team is 6 or 8 people or something, but if no one is around, I escalate it up to like just the source code team. And that's like 50 people or something, and that they're spread out all over the world. There's usually somebody online. There's usually somebody who has front-end expertise online that can help unstick me. If no one is there, then I escalate it up one more. I'm going to go all the way to like the front end group. Anyone in front end in the entire company, maybe you can answer my question. I try not to start there, because that's a lot of noise, right? If everyone in the whole company is getting my questions every time, then like it probably could have been resolved at a lower level. But I think the key here is being super like open and willing to say, I'm stuck and I don't know what I'm doing. Can someone help me? And being able to put that in front of 200 people it's hard, but it's really important to be able to get unstuck on those problems. Now, it changes a little bit if you have a smaller company. So if you have a small company and you're spread out all over the world, and it's maybe just 1 or 2 of you in a time zone, that definitely becomes a little bit more of a problem. And the way that GitLab solves that problem is by not solving it, essentially. Like, if we know that we're stuck, and I tell my manager, I'm like, I'm stuck on this and I need the backend person who's working on this to answer my question, but that backend person is in New Zealand and they are not going to start work for another 24 hours. Okay, that's you just have to deal with it. Like, that's sort of the nature of being all remote, is sometimes you have time lags between individuals. And I'll say, I know I'm really privileged, but like the company understands that working all remote, we're not always going to be able to unblock every problem immediately, and delays are inevitable. So it's just part of the process. If you cannot get your company to understand that, like it's not your fault, right? It's not your fault. It's just, this is how time works. It sucks that you have a delay, but it's just going to happen. If your company doesn't understand that, I would say, and this is what I do too, just move to something else, right? Presumably you have more than one thing you're working on. Hopefully you can work on one other thing. Or if you don't have like a deliverable task you can work on, hopefully you can work on something that's bettering yourself or the company, writing documentation or improving something, cleaning up some tech debt, whatever it is. Those things go a long way to being like, listen, I was blocked, I couldn't help it, but I did this other thing that I think is really beneficial to the company. Hopefully managers and executives look on that with positive vibes. Did that get toward your question? I hope that answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
Excellent.
And next, John put a question in the chat. John, do you want to share it?
I actually think you already answered that question, kind of, in a way. I mean, maybe. No, I think you answered it. I don't even want to waste time if other people have questions. So I appreciate that.
Great, open floor. I think I saw Kim's hand first.
Thomas, did you say GitLab doesn't have meetings? I'm asking because I also work at a fully distributed company, but we have pretty set hours and we have a lot of meetings. So
Yeah.
time is not as negotiable.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. I don't think that I said GitLab doesn't have meetings, but I will jump on that. GitLab has meetings, lots of meetings, because everything is async. And so everyone, if you need to spread some information, we'll often have 3 different meetings for that one thing. It'll be an APAC meeting for Asia Pacific. There'll be like a North America meeting, and then there'll be like a European meeting. So basically kind of grabbing the 3 areas of the world. None of them are mandatory. That's really the key. So there's a lot of meetings that share information, even team meetings between me and 5 other people, not mandatory. If I can't show up or don't want to show up to a certain meeting, I'm not docked for not being there. If it's a small team meeting with just like, me and the 2 other front-end people on my team, I should probably tell my manager why I can't make it to that meeting, but like he understands, so I think it's important for remote companies to understand that information that is absolutely critical for their employees to know should be written down. You shouldn't have to be in a meeting hearing it on video, and then that information is either just recorded or lost into the ether forever. The reason that I think that is because I really like how GitLab is run, and we have like a 4,000-page handbook. Everything that we believe in and say essentially is in our handbook. So when I said earlier that like family and friends are first and work is second, that's in our handbook. You can go to GitLab handbook and read that. So information that's important should be written down, and then you don't have to go to a meeting.
I'm gonna jump in real quick. If you want to queue up a question, go ahead and do reactions on Zoom and raise your hand, and I'll keep an eye on our participant list. But I saw Alice put up a physical hand. If you want to take the next question.
Cool. So we have a lot of boot campers on here, and I think I've heard a lot of different companies and how they onboard juniors and a variety of tactics, and now everyone's having to change to onboarding remotely. And so like, what did you see at GitLab that you thought was really helpful for onboarding, or if you have onboarded other juniors, what sort of practices make that a smooth process?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. And I should note that I was talking with our director of engineering not very long ago, and that is one of the things that is really difficult, particularly onboarding junior developers, because sometimes that's their first job or one of their first jobs. And usually you make friends at your first job that are friends for a really long time. I'm still friends with like 3 or 4 people from my first job, and I haven't seen them for like years. I'm still friends with them because I sat in the same room as them for hours every day. So it's a really tough problem to solve because when you're all remote, you don't get that social like bonding. I will say the way that I think GitLab does onboarding is good, and I'm sure that it could use improvement. Here's the things I think are really great about GitLab's onboarding. A checklist of things to do, and it's a really long checklist. And it's like 200 plus items in this checklist, and they're like nested sometimes like 3 levels deep. Like once you've done this, there's this other thing to do. Right off the bat, your first day, your manager says, this checklist is not a like binding agreement. These are things that you should look at. Just see if you need to do it. There's some things you need to sign in there. There's some things you want to read in there. Make sure you just look through this and start checking items off. It doesn't have to be on a time limit. Just do it at some point. Those 2 things together, the big checklist and the casual treatment of the checklist, I think helped me go, okay, here's a list of things that I can get to at any point. I don't have to worry about when I'm doing them. And it's not going to be something that if I don't get done, my boss is like, hey, what's happening? Why haven't you done this? So the checklist and the treatment is really important. The second thing I think was like probably the most important thing that GitLab does is they assign you a buddy, and your buddy is someone who's been at the company for a while, and they're there to be your first point of contact. You are their like main concern for as long as you need it. So usually about a month, maybe 2 months, maybe 3 months, but you can just ping them anytime with any question and say, I'm feeling overwhelmed. I have questions. I don't know what I'm doing. Help me. And the buddy is there to answer your questions and be your friend and get on a Zoom call with you and be like, it's okay. I experienced this too. When I started, it'll be fine. Don't worry about it, whatever. Just reassuring someone and saying, I experienced this too. That's really, really critical. What are some other things? Man, those 2 things are the biggest things. Those are the biggest things. Everything else sort of falls aside once you think about like having a list of things that you know that you should look at, and having a friend who is like you are their responsibility. Those are huge things. I think like I mentioned earlier, onboarding juniors will be a problem until we solve the problem, but right now it isn't solved yet. I told my director of engineering the story that I told you of, like, I made friends at my first job, and solving that problem is a really big issue. The smaller things like we have our first 2 items, and then like a distant third is like having some small things to get achievements. So when I first started, I'm a senior engineer. I started as a senior engineer, and I had like a tiny little bug fix to do. It seems like I should be able to knock it out, but there's a lot of learning that goes into a new code base, and having something small, having like a little small thing to be like, okay, now I understand the context of this, and I can start expanding slowly out. That's really helpful. So it's actually part of the onboarding checklist is like, here's your 3 assigned issues that are like good starters for you. And when I started, one of my issues was like, great for first contributions, and that's great for our community members too. Like first contribution for a community member is also a great first contribution for a new team member. So having small stuff to do, I think, is kind of important.
Thanks. That really answered quite a lot, and it was really helpful to just sort of like visualize what that process might be like as more companies are having to onboard people remotely.
Yeah.
And still like adhering to those practices. Yeah, I've heard that same issue brought up of like, how do you facilitate those like casual, frequent, unplanned interactions that help like people bond socially in a workplace setting, especially remote work. And I don't know that anyone's really figured it out.
Yeah. I would say there are 2 things that GitLab is trying to do, or there are 2 things that GitLab has right now that might help that. And I think that we can do better at solving the specific problem of onboarding a new employee. But the 2 things are, we used to have a company call, and I was saying earlier about the calls would happen in every time zone. Same thing with this company call. It would happen in essentially every time zone. It's 3 broad groups of time zones. And that was where we shared company information. So you could just chime in, get company information, and then drop out and you'd be fine. That wasn't all that useful. So they switched to delivering company information in a written format, right? So write it down so no one has to go to a meeting. And those calls just became social calls. So you go to the meeting invite and it's broken out like, do you want to talk about hobbies? Go to this Zoom link. Do you want to talk about your pets? Go to this Zoom link. Do you want to talk about food and drink? Go to this Zoom link. So anyone who wants to, at any time really, multiple times throughout the day, can just jump into this call with other people who are interested in talking about a certain thing and just talk with them and just see them on a Zoom call like this and have that information. The other thing that GitLab has done and will continue to do, other than this year because it was scheduled for the end of March and it was canceled, is we get everyone together in one place. And it's sort of like a conference, sort of like a social gathering. This year it was scheduled to be in Prague, and we were going to have talks from people at the company and people all just talking about their lives. And that's really important to just like get everyone together. I've never met anyone on my team other than my buddy who came to Colorado to drive his Jeep because he wanted to drive his Jeep off-road. So I met my onboarding buddy who's on my team. Other than that, I never met anyone. So having the company get everyone together is really important to just build that social bonds. It's not as frequent, obviously, but it helps. I explained Triscuits to people who aren't in the US, and they had no idea what they were, and I promised to bring them a box of Triscuits next time we get together. So like that kind of stuff is going to be good for bonding, you know?
Cool, thank you.
All right, next, Christina. Christine, sorry.
Christine. So I have kind of a similar question, but more related to collaboration. So being fully remote, how does the company foster like group collaboration, or how do you personally like collaborate with your teammates to maybe just bounce off ideas with each other and things like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I will say I'm probably not the perfect person to answer that particular question. I do well, or I do best working on my own until I hit a wall and then finding information out from someone else and then continuing on my own. But we do lots of things as a company to help facilitate that collaboration. First of all, we want everything to start as a merge request or a pull request if you use GitHub. Merge request is kind of the initial place that things start. That's how we make changes to our company policy in our handbook. So the first thing is opening a merge request and inviting discussion onto that. So I have this change, please comment on this and tell me what you think. That gets into a lot of other values about like having short toes, right? Like a lot of people are afraid to step on people's toes. Well, at GitLab, we try to have short toes. People might say something that sounds aggressive, but in text, it's hard to communicate intent. So just assume the best and like, hopefully we get to the good solution. So that's kind of the first thing, is just like people are invited to comment on your changes or your work. Then the next thing we do is kind of like, if you are having a problem, just schedule like a pairing session. We're moving all of our tests from Karma to Jest right now. And so every week we have a pairing session. It's early in the morning for US time. So it's like 8 a.m. US times. But that fits fairly well in a lot of time zones. And it's just one guy who's like, hey, I want to do this. If you are interested in moving tests to Jest, come on and join me, and we'll get on this call and we'll do some code together, and we'll work on whatever you want to work on, because it doesn't matter. There's like 1,000 files. So like, let's pick a folder and we'll just do it. Same sort of thing. We do ad hoc. This microphone is not usually at this computer. And so I hooked it up earlier today, and I was in my Slack, and I was like, hey, is anyone here who can just like get on a Zoom call with me and test my microphone? And somebody was around. I think he lives in Australia. So it was like kind of end of his day. And he's like, sure, I'll get on a call with you and we'll just like test your microphone. It was a good thing because my audio didn't work for a little while. So that's sort of the 3 levels of like, you can write it down in a merge request or a pull request and have people comment on that, have people check it out, run the code on their own and see what it looks like, leave comments, leave suggestions to changes. You can schedule meetings of like, I'm going to do this at this time. Whoever wants to show up can, or you can ad hoc, just like reach out and be like, I need help, or I want you to work on me with this, or whatever. And it's hopefully someone's around to do that. I think those are the 3 basic ways you can do that. And like I said earlier, one of the main priorities of any person at our company, and this doesn't have to be specific to GitLab, right? If you're working remote, this should be kind of specific to any company going remote. Your main priority is to unblock someone else. So no matter what you're working on, if someone else says, I am stuck and I cannot solve this problem, that becomes your first problem. Your first priority is solve that problem with them or for them, and then you can get back to your thing. That helps keep things flowing, right? When I'm just randomly browsing around Slack, someone will ask a question, and it may not even be something that I really am an expert on, but if I know where I can point them to get the answer, that's the first thing I do. Like, here's where you can go, here's the information, I hope that helps, and now I'm moving on to my own thing. Did that help at all? I know that's not the best answer, and a lot of people are used to like pair programming constantly, and so like not having that might be really disastrous for some people. But I hope that answer helped a little bit.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool.
No questions queued. Anyone else?
I think there might be an issue with the queuing of the questions, because I think I noticed actually 2 hands go up. Like I saw mine and Lisa's go up at some point, and I didn't see. I don't know. Maybe are we not doing it right? Is there like a spot that we would do that? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I don't see any other hands up in the participants list. Down along the bottom of the chat, there's.
Oh, so you're saying in the participants list, is there a spot there that we raise a hand? Oh, I see it now.
Yep.
Okay. I thought we were supposed to do that in reactions. My apologies.
Oh, I clicked on the wrong thing, I think. Or I told you the wrong thing. I apologize.
Okay. No worries. No worries.
I'm still learning Zoom too.
It's okay. Everybody is. That's like, yeah, that's the, yeah.
Okay, so you said you and Lisa both did.
You want to go first?
You can go first.
Okay. So when you're looking for remote jobs, what type of things do you look for? And what sites do you use to get that information?
That's a really hard question. It doesn't seem like it's a hard question, but it is actually a really hard question. There are a number of sites. I think this one's like all remote jobs or something. Hold on. I'm actually going to search for this on the fly because I don't want to give you bad information. Nope, that's not it. Well, so there are a few sites dedicated to remote jobs. I can't tell you what they are right now, but there are a few. And so those are really great places. If you're just like, I want any remote job, it doesn't matter as long as it's remote. There are sites that are just like, all we post is remote jobs, that's it. That's probably the best place. The next best thing, in my opinion, is to find a company that you like a company that you like, and go to their postings and see if they have remote jobs. Obviously, like GitLab, all their postings are remote, so it's not going to matter. But for other companies, they may have some that are like, this job is remote, you can work from anywhere, and other ones are not. That's my next best answer. And the reason for that is because I think that if you are not happy with the company, you're going to have a bad experience with remote. So if you dislike the company, or you are just desperate for a job, which I know unfortunately a lot of people are, especially right now, sometimes you got to just take a job if it's available. And if you're not happy with the company, you'll burn out a lot faster than if you are really happy with the company. So find the company that you want to work for and see if they are posting jobs. I think that's a really great way to have a job that you will like for a long time. I'm sorry I don't have any more specific information, especially since I couldn't find those websites. But yeah, primarily I would search for sites that are like dedicated to remote jobs, because they'll tend to be, you can refine your search to things that you actually want, rather than most of your mental power being looking for whether the job is remote or not on just general job sites. Sorry, that was a weak answer, but it's the best I've got. I'm sorry.
That was good, thank you.
Am I good to ask a question now? Sweet. So this is really just more of a curiosity thing. So given the current market being, kind of weird, I guess I'm just curious if you've felt like maybe a sense of value from the way other people have been treating you because on your resume you have some level of I've been remote for the past 8 years. So I'm wondering if like companies are now looking at that as some sort of skill. I'm just curious about that.
Well, I haven't specifically updated my resume in months since I started at GitLab, so I will say that that's just something that it's something that's valuable to me, right? So working remote is valuable to me. I don't, unless something really catastrophic happens, I don't foresee myself ever going back to an office job. It's just it's the office and I don't really get along. So remote for me is it's the only way I want to work. So that's why it's on my resume. It's like I'm remote. This is how I work, and I've been doing this for a long time. I do think that it's more valuable now. There's a lot of people who have been working remote for a few years or a few months, and now suddenly everyone is remote, and those people have a lot of experience to share. I think you'll find that most people who work remote sort of for a while, unless it really just doesn't fit with their personality, which is a thing, not everyone has to be comfortable working remote, right? So like if you're not comfortable working remote, you want to work in an office, that's totally fine. It's not that it's a better thing. It's a better thing for some people. But a lot of people have started working remote and they find that they really like it and they want to learn more. And you'll find that people who work remote for a while, if they really like it, they want to share, they want to tell people about how great remote is for them. And so that's one of those things that I kind of publish about myself. It's like, I've been working remote for a long time, and I hope that that's something that you are interested in and you can ask me about it. I do think to answer your question specifically about our companies getting value from it, I answered it kind of from a personal perspective. From a more professional perspective, yes, I think that companies are moving remote more. And so being able to say, I worked remote for 2 months during the coronavirus outbreak, like that's good. I have experience doing it, you know? The thing that the site that I said earlier, allremote.info, that download has some statistics in it of like the growth of remote, and pretty much across the board, remote is going up. People are working remote, and there's good reasons for it, right? You can pay some salary, whether it's whatever salary you define, and then get a pool of applicants from all over the world. You're not limiting yourself to one physical location, and companies, I think they should love that, right? If they don't trust their employees to actually be doing the work, then they're not going to love it. But if you trust your employees, then getting job applicants from everywhere in the world is a huge benefit to you. And that's why remote is increasing. So yeah, I think companies do see value in remote. Even if you are applying for a job that isn't remote itself, the ability to say to a potential employer, I worked remote for years, and I was able to stay on task. I was able to communicate with my teammates. I was able to resolve problems on my own, or if I couldn't, go to people who knew how to resolve those problems. I was able to communicate effectively with my manager and people up the chain because they wanted to know what I was working on, and I could tell them that. Those skills are all really important skills to have in any job. And so saying I did that all the time when I was remote is something that I think companies look at and say, well, you had to. I know you had to be doing that to work successfully at that job. So I trust that you really have those skills.
Thank you.
And you don't have to be remote to build those skills either. You can build those skills anywhere. But being able to stay remote says that you had to exercise them.
I didn't catch any other raised hand. Did I miss someone?
I've got a question. I just want to make sure I'm respectful of your time, though. Are you doing okay on time, Thomas?
I can stay until 1 a.m.
Okay, cool.
I can't.
Marlena can't.
Okay, so like prior to COVID, I had heard some advice that if you want to work remote, sometimes there's more flexibility for jobs that might not put it in the description, for the same reason why jobs don't want to say they're hiring like a junior developer, because they'll get flooded with emails immediately. How do you feel about that in terms of like your advice earlier of approaching companies that really interest you or problems that really interest you, and then after the initial offer saying, well, I really want to work here, could we start with 2 days remote and kind of slowly kind of widening that remote gap, if you will?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. And I like the idea. I like your idea. And it's going to depend on the company. That takes a lot of bravery, right? If you need a job, if you have to have a job, which I think everyone does. If I lost my job right now, I have a mortgage to pay and like help. But to ask for something like, hey, I like this job. I like this offer. I really like your company. I think I'm going to need a little bit of remote because that's important to me. That takes bravery. And what I will say is that's also really important. That's part of the negotiation process is like, if that's important to you, you should ask for that. Absolutely. Absolutely ask for that. That's something that a good company should be willing to offer you. Like, okay, we think that you are going to be a good fit for our team and we want to work with you and you want this thing that maybe we don't do right now. Let's see how it works. I hope that a company would be willing to offer that too. But I think a lot of people are, they're afraid that the offer will just be rescinded if they ask for that. And ideally it would not be, right? That's just part of the negotiation process. A company should not be hiring if they're not willing to negotiate with someone. And so if someone says, I would like this thing, and a company just says, oh, never mind, we don't want to hire you. I hate to say it, but you dodged a bullet, right? You don't want to work for that company anyway. The company should at the very least say, sorry, we can't offer that. Will you take our initial offer? At the very least, that's the most respectful thing to do for you. But yeah, I mean, I like your idea of asking for those things. That's something that I think more people should be doing, is asking for things that they want in their offer package. But it's hard. It takes a lot of guts to like come back to a company and be like, yeah, how about this instead? It feels daunting. But you're right. There's a lot of flexibility in jobs. If they don't say remote, I would definitely bring it up. Bring it up in your first interview. You know, they bring you in for the culture fit interview, whatever that means, and say, you know, I love working remote. I think it's great for employees to work when they're most productive. I think it's great for employees to be available at times that maybe aren't usual. I think it's great for employees to be practicing good communication, writing down things. Right, you're framing it as like, here's all the great things you can get from an all remote employee. And see where that helps you, because maybe they are flexible.
Okay.
It's scary though.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if starting small works, like, you know, a 1 day a week kind of thing. But I mean, for instance, I guess to draw an analogy, for my friends that I've never cooked for, when I offer to cook for them the first time, I could tell that they're hesitant. Like, Corey, what are you going to be feeding me? I definitely don't trust you. But like, after that first time, they're like, oh, okay, like that tasted kind of all right. I'm assuming, like, I'm trying to apply, I guess, the same thing to asking for 1 remote day a week, and then kind of once that trust is established, going from there.
Absolutely. I can tell you that I don't have the experience to say whether that works or not. My jobs have it's totally been binary, either no remote or I've been all remote. So I can't tell you that from experience whether that works or not, but your framing of it there sounds totally reasonable to me. Ask for, you know, I want to take a Wednesday and be remote, just a Wednesday. It's not the end of the week, right? I'm not going to slack off on a Friday. It's not the beginning of the week. I'll take a Wednesday and I'll work remote, and building that trust. Hopefully the people that you work with and work for see that you are still there, you're still available, you're still working, and you can expand that. I think you're right. I think you're right that starting small is the way to go.
All right. Well, we'll see as a junior how well that works.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
Well, thank you though.
Yeah.
Got time for a couple more questions. Lisa.
So when it comes to salary, does remote work affect that in any way?
Well, sometimes. So the way GitLab works, there's actually a calculator online. If you want to see my salary, you can go online and type in that I'm a senior, thriving front-end developer and give the location here in Denver, and you'll see my range of salary. I make like 118,000, something like that. I don't know exactly. That's around, I think, fairly fair for a front-end developer. I think it could be more, but it could also be a lot less. The way GitLab does it is location-based. So it's using a factor from San Francisco. San Francisco is 1.0. And then every location around the world has some multiplier of that. So I think Denver is 0.87 of San Francisco or something like that. It's in that calculator. I'm not sure that location-based salary adjustments are the right way to do things, because it incentivizes people to move to like really low cost of living areas, and their money goes farther. Now it's adjusted, right? It's adjusted to lower cost, but their money will go farther there. I think that a service is provided and it should be the same number no matter where that service is provided from. So if we think that $120,000 is a fair salary for a senior developer, that should be the salary for a senior developer no matter where they are, because that is the value that you're providing. Arguments can go either way, whatever. I do think that, to answer your question more directly, I do think that location sometimes has an effect on salary. If you're working for a San Francisco-based company, they may not be willing to pay you as much as they pay their local developers, and they may not have the right adjustment, right? I think GitLab's is okay, right? It's like 0.87 of whatever they pay their San Francisco developers, and it works out pretty well. But maybe your company's just like, well, you're not San Francisco, so we'll pay you half of what we pay our other developers. That's probably not gonna be okay. And maybe it goes the other way too, right? Like maybe you're working remote and you're working for a San Francisco company and they've picked some number to pay their developers and you just get that number. Well, that's great for you. You just got you got a San Francisco salary in Denver. That means you're kind of rolling in it. But I hope, I have no evidence of this, but I hope that remote work does not directly affect what people are willing to pay. Because in my mind, it's a transfer of service. I'm doing a service for you and you're giving me money, and that should be true whether I live near you or not. Human nature is not what I hope for, right? So some people will probably say, well, you're not near me, so I don't trust you quite as much, so I'm gonna offer you 15,000 less or something. That was actually not that exact case, but I've had that before where I got a little bit less money, and I accepted these terms. So this is partially on me. I got a little bit less money, and part of it was like, well, you're remote, that's a perk. It is a perk, but I'm still providing the same service. So again, this takes bravery in negotiation, and it's really hard to do. It's really hard to be like, no, I'm worth more than that, and you can't pay me less just because I'm not sitting next to you. And that's really hard to do. It's hard for me to do. I've negotiated 6 different jobs, and it still makes me sweat every time I do it, and then my stomach is in knots, and it's awful. It's the worst thing. It's the worst thing you have to do at any job is the negotiation part. But it is really important for your future. That extra $10,000 right off the bat, that means the next time you get a job, that's your base salary. That's the lowest you'll go, is that extra 10,000, and that accrues over time. So it's hard, but you kind of have to do it.
Thank you.
Yeah. A utopian view, remote doesn't affect salary at all. Real world, it probably does a little bit. Thanks, Kyle.
All right, any other questions? I had some written down, but I think you really
If anyone
covered them all.
Oh, and George also raised his hand there, so go ahead.
Oh, go for it.
Do you mind if I add you on LinkedIn?
No, go ahead. I will say I use LinkedIn as little as possible. It's not because I dislike LinkedIn or the people on LinkedIn. I just don't really use it that much. The best way to get in contact with me is to email me. I know that sounds ridiculous, but that I will actually answer my emails. My email should be publicly available on my GitLab account. That's Thomas Randolph on GitLab. Or you can access, I think my email might be also on my kind of resume site. It's rdl.ph. And let me check and make sure before I give you that information. Yes. So if you go to rdl.ph, my email address is there. You can always send me information there, or any other form of contacting me. I'll eventually see it, but feel free to add me on LinkedIn.
Thank you.
Yeah, and actually, that was the last thing I wanted to say was feel free to connect with me. Reach out to me if you want any information. You can always send me an email. I'm on Twitter, but less now. I'm trying to get off social media, so I'm not on many social medias. But if you ever find any way to contact me, feel free. I'll answer you at least. I might not have the best answer for you or the most thrilling conversation, but I will respond to you and not leave you hanging. So LinkedIn, though, you might be a week before I get back to you.
Last call for question. Oh, go ahead.
No question. I was just admiring rdl.ph. This is such a fun site. Great job.
I'm really proud of one thing on there. If you scroll down, there's a button that shows older work items and older volunteer items. And one of my main things for this site was no JavaScript. So those buttons toggle content without any JavaScript. It's all CSS and whether a checkbox is checked or not. So I'm really proud of that.
Ooh. What led to that decision?
So earlier when I was giving my background, I was saying I've done all this work like backend stuff, and now I'm doing JavaScript. And for a while I was doing pure JavaScript. Everything is just like index.html, and then there's like a div, and then JavaScript loads in and it loads everything in. That results in really big JavaScript bundles, and it's not very accessible unless you do a lot of work. You do a lot of work to make JavaScript accessible. And so part of my desire to move toward a simpler web, and earlier I was talking about like wanting to do more like platform basic stuff like web components. Part of that is just like I want to do things simpler and more accessibly, and that means basically just like shipping raw HTML and letting the browser do its magic of like making things accessible, that kind of stuff. There's still some work to do, obviously, but a simpler web for me is a more fun web to work on. And I have a lot of like, when I write my blog posts, for example, I write them in HTML, and then that is just dumped into a file and it is saved to the internet. And there's something really cathartic about that. Like, I don't know if anyone was doing like HTML back in like the early MySpace days or those kinds of things, but like just like being able to save a file and it immediately just works without any compiling, no bundling, nothing. That's like a really great web for me. I really like doing that. So it's basically, why did I do it? It just felt good.
Awesome. All right, last call for questions. All right, well, thank you, Thomas.
Thank you for having me. Absolutely no problem.
Thank you.
I hope this was useful to people. That's most important.
It was a lot of really good information. I really appreciate you doing this.
Thank you.
Let me